This week's podcast is going to be about what is perfect or imperfect, for want of a better word. So, when you look at property, I suppose one of the roles of technology nowadays is we have never had more access to the concept of perfection. It could be how we put filters on in our Zoom calls, perish the thought. But when you look at your own internal association with perfect when you're looking for property, sometimes you're setting yourself up for severe disappointment because the likes of, let's say, Pinterest are phenomenal tools to be able to curate ideas, color boards, designs, even a vision board of what you hope to achieve in time to come. But sometimes that can then severely skew the reality on the ground, either with what's available in the market, what you're capable of buying, or what the reality of a particular style, finish, or aesthetic is. So there's people who may want a period house, but the reality of a period house in real life, it's much like a classic car. It is not necessarily super reliable. It's a labor of love, and it's kind of a never-ending process. Equally, someone else who's going for a very extreme aesthetic, that may be a particular snapshot in time. So much like fashion, you could have someone that loves a cool idea, but if you had to live with it every day of the week, it's something that you want to be very mindful of. So in this week's article, I'm essentially trying to look at the variety of ways we can trip ourselves up when it comes to viewing property from that perfection viewpoint, and maybe a couple of tips just to make it a little bit easier. So when you're essentially looking at perfection, I always view it as a moving target, because what I wanted 5 years ago isn't the same as what I want now, and will unlikely to be the same in 5 years' time. Taste changes, much like clothing. You buy something and it suits you for a few seasons, and it's important to be open and fluid with that, because that's okay. You don't have to judge yourself when it comes to what it is you thought you wanted versus the reality. But just remember that perfection is one of those things that does move. And what's perfect when you're single versus when you're married, when you're younger versus when you're older, when you're working versus when you're not, it's important to just acknowledge that perfection isn't a particular thing set in stone and that's it. It's not immovable, because you can be your own worst enemy by clinging on to something that no longer applies. So just keep that in mind. The next thing is the role of Instagram and the likes of Pinterest. So I briefly mentioned it, but technology is great, but there are always two sides to everything. So you have to be very careful when it comes to what you curate, that you acknowledge the role of reality in that. If you're putting in something that looks absolutely perfect in a wonderful setting where it's sunny 990 days of the year, that's going to be different to if you're in a darker climate that doesn't necessarily have those same color tones. If your lifestyle revolves around being in a city-centric location, and you want somewhere with a walled garden 400 miles out of the city, the aesthetic is going to be different, the lifestyle is going to be different, and Pinterest doesn't necessarily tell you that. So that obviously it's not designed to do so, but just to keep that in mind, that Instagram and Pinterest are very good to give you a guide, but you always want to be very mindful of the role of reality in that particular setting. Perfection paralysis is probably something I see quite a lot, because people are fearful of making that decision. And I think the old phrase, I used to be indecisive, but now I'm not so sure. I see it quite a lot with people who can be very decisive in some settings. When it comes to property, they can almost overanalyze to make it the what if. And I think when I'm dealing with people, it's very important to look at the likes of property checklists, your criteria, how you curate those conversations with stakeholders. Because when you're looking at property, it's very important to be aware of what it is you want, what it is the other people who are involved want, but also you have to notice your blind spots. And what sometimes can happen is you can jump down and say, I'm thinking of doing this and this is what we're going for. And when it comes down to actually making a decision, you overanalyze, you try and imagine all the different variations that are involved in this particular decision. And before you know it, you actually realize that you're holding yourself to a standard, or holding a property to a standard that doesn't align with your criteria. So just to keep that in mind when it comes to that paralysis element of making a decision, it's very important to keep yourself honest. And it's funny that people overlook the likes of a checklist because it seems so arbitrary, but it is the North Star to what you do. Because when you sit down, if you're not clear and you haven't looked at the shortcomings in your search, the stuff you're overlooking, it's very easy to overlook the fact that I don't mind driving a little bit further every day, but have you done it for 4 years? Have you done it for 5 years? What's your life really looking like? What does your partner or the person who's buying a property with you say as well? And it's very important to keep these things in mind. And it's one of those little things where when you're weighing those up, you then realize what your must-haves are versus your nice-to-have. And I think when you look at perfect might be a southwest-facing garden with enough room for, additional outside office, whatever it may be. So when you're looking at your must-haves, nice-to-have, and must-not-haves, these will play a role in perfection as well. And I think you have to weigh up what your absolute must be. So when you're assessing a property, it's important for you to say, if you have to have off-street parking and that's your absolute mecca or your North Star in terms of what you're looking for, it's very important that you acknowledge that. And don't let it waver unless you've gotten to a stage where you've decided that the market isn't presenting enough opportunities or it's coming above your price point. So I think it's very important that you almost take the word perfect out of your dictionary. Really assess your property checklist, really assess your must-haves, nice-to-haves and must-not-haves. And that's going to make it a little bit easier to overcome or circumvent the concept of what perfect is. And I always lead with this, no matter how many conversations I have. It's that everyone's version of winning is different. And my version of perfect is someone else's version of crazy, insane. And you have to lean into that and you have to embrace that, because your own version of perfection is going to be imperfect to someone else. And that's the beauty in it. You don't owe anyone else an explanation. It's just very important to keep yourself mindful of that. And I suppose the last thing is, when you think of imperfections, the last phrase that I use is that there is a wonder in exploring with curiosity property, because property is always changing. You think that's it, I'm never going to buy something again. And I often encounter people who say, well, that's it, forever home, whatever else it may be. You have no idea what's in store. You have no idea what's going to happen with life, job opportunities, environmental changes, even just wanting to scratch an itch to do something else, move somewhere else, do something else. So leave yourself open to that and try not to hold yourself to this particular unwavering standard of perfection in your decision-making abilities, that something has to be forever, or that you're beating yourself up by virtue of not meeting the standards that you set for yourself. And above all else, make sure that you really lean into what your version of perfect is, as in, don't let other people dictate to you what it is that you should be doing, because the reality is you have to live in it, you have to pay for it, and you have to enjoy it. So I hope you enjoyed this week's article. Anyone has any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And if you'd like topics covered, feel free to email me, andrew@ore.ie. And for anyone who stuck to the end of the video, you will actually notice that in the article, you can actually WhatsApp me a question or topics or comment. So feel free and have a great rest of the weekend.